Hi everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Innovation Podcast from Wooshii. I'm Fergus Dyer-Smith, and today I spoke to Wayne Davison, the MD of Content Distribution and Acquisition at Little Dot Studios. Fascinating chat. We talked through a bundle of things, but mostly focused on building audiences and the implications of the changes at most of the big social platforms for brands. So take a listen, tell us what you think, and have fun. So Wayne Davison, Little Dot Studios, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure.
So I had a ton of questions all around branded content, which turns out you're not the best person to talk to about.
I've got a list of people you should talk to.
Right, okay, which is fantastic. So we'll get to that at some point. But we have a whole lot of other interesting things to cover off. But I thought I'd start just at the sort of basic side of this, which is there's been this massive shift over the last, I suppose you could say, 5 years with the big sort of social platforms. Becoming much more content-led. I guess more recently we're seeing LinkedIn go the same route. And I'm super interested in sort of what your view is on that, what that means for brands specifically. Like, how should they be thinking about that? What the consideration they need to sort of take down from all of this?
Yeah. Is it useful to start a little bit with kind of where Little Dot fits into the picture? Because that probably gives a bit of context. Little Dot are a probably very averagely described as a digital content studio and distributor. We have a production business, digital distribution business, more recently a media buying, media sales part of our business as well. And my focus is predominantly driven on the distribution side of the business. I run all of our distribution verticals across sport and broadcast, our production partners, the US studios, and we built the business to about 7 years ago to kind of fit into the gap between the traditional content owners and platforms like predominantly at the time YouTube, also Facebook, Instagram as they've evolved. And interestingly, each one of those different partners that we work with, whether that's Channel 4, Discovery, Viacom, or the FA, England Cricket Board, Red Bull, and so on, each of them have a different purpose. Everyone's kind of using these platforms for different focuses. Some are about just sheer monetization and just building new revenue streams. Others are about how do they build new audiences and grow their presence on these platforms. How do they reach younger audiences? And all of particularly the broadcast partners are seeing aging and declining audiences on traditional. Oh yeah, very much so. As are the sports rights holders who have taken big checks.
Is that because the younger generation just aren't turning to those channels?
They're just not on TV. I mean, I think the average age of the BBC One audience is something like 61, and E4, which is Channel 4's youth channel, is kind of in that 35 to 40. That's their youth channel, which is marginally worrying as an aging demo. So they're all looking for how do we reach these younger audiences, because they're not coming to TV anymore in the way they used to. So reach is a really key piece of that, and kind of will bring us on to, I guess, where the brands are. A lot of them have their own owned and operated services. I'll do that again. Each of them have their own owned and operated services, whether that's a kind of catch-up service or whether they're trying to drive to a subscription video on demand service. How can you use these platforms to drive to those environments? We work with some consumer products divisions who are trying to basically drive intent to purchase. So there's a whole host of different activities going on across all these different partners. And whilst they're not kind of traditional content owners, they're not brands in the traditional sense of the word. They are having to evolve into brands more broadly than just being a traditional broadcaster or a traditional sports centre. So it's a really interesting time, because YouTube have been on the scene for a long time and have been a video first platform for a long time. Interestingly, they're moving the other way. They're actually moving more social and introducing lots more social based tools, community tabs, and much more stories and kind of much more social driven platform focus, whereas everybody else is moving the other way. Facebook is, introduced Watch 2 years ago. We're still trying to figure out how that grows, but they're evolving that. Instagram launched IGTV. Snap have their Discover environment, although it's a slightly different beast because it's a kind of closed wall. And LinkedIn, as you mentioned, I mean, it's not predominantly on my partner's radars, but you can see it.
You can see the way it's
You can see it's evolving, and they're all pushing video, and for a multitude of reasons. One, it increases retention on the platforms. More viewing of video means longer watch time, means longer retention, and therefore all of our statistics go up, and more advertising being served against all of that content. So it's a really interesting time, particularly when you think about it in the context of brands who have traditionally used those platforms as probably quite traditional ways, the way a TV advertising would be delivered, serving kind of campaigns through paid media and those kind of environments. How do you build and contain and control an audience in those different environments?
So that's an interesting question. Like, how does someone think about building an audience within those platforms? And is it just, is a big element of that time served, so to speak, as in, yes.
Like you're nodding. Yeah, no, I think it's a difficult question. I think what we do. It's easier for the partners we work with because they have volumes of content. They're working with TV content. They're working with archive. They're a brand. All of these platforms are driven by certain algorithms as well. That's the other thing. They're data-driven platforms. And they're complicated. It's not easy to build an audience organically. It's forever changing. I mean, we're working with, I think, something like 4 billion views a month on YouTube alone.
Wow.
Across all of our different activities. We have, I think we'll probably hit about 3 billion views this year on Facebook. And all of that is just feeding our insights team with what thumbnail works best, what length of content is working most effectively, how are we titling, how are we delivering metadata, all of the kind of the guts of the platform that are really delivering the audience. Alongside that, you also then need the content, and that's the interesting complexity that a brand has, because they're traditionally driven by campaign, switch on paid, deliver a big spike, and then it disappears, and we start all over again. What we've been working with all of these partners is, how do you build a long-term organic audience that when you are putting big kind of, I guess for the best, one of the better phrase, big hero pieces that sit inside that they don't just deliver a spike, they deliver a spike and build and it sustains and grows off the back of it. So a kind of a paid strategy actually sitting alongside an organic strategy, rather than a kind of paid versus organic, becomes ever more important. The only way to do that is by building a longer term content strategy, which is kind of counter to what how brands operate, because they're thinking about what's our next campaign, what we're going to do.
So when you say longer term, I mean, how long should they be thinking? I mean, obviously it's broad strokes here, but is long 2 months, or is it 12 months or 2 years? Like, what are they?
I mean, the longer the better. I think that the reality with these, it's very difficult to think in kind of 2-3 year strategies for anybody, in fact, whether that's sports or broadcasters, but all brands. But longer term has to be over at least a 12-month period, because the effects of, we when we start with a new client on the broadcast, in the broadcast world, or a sports partner, we'll always give them a talk of doom. It's the kind of, it'll take we'll spend a month and we'll build all this up, and we'll start building this out. 3 months you'll be thinking, this is not really worth the effort. 6 months you're ready to switch it off. 9 months it starts to grow, and by 12 months you're in a really solid position. That can be accelerated with paid to support it, but it has to be supported rather than it's organic paid supporting organic rather than paid driving organic. I think that's the really key part to it.
Yeah.
Because with an organic audience, the algorithms are delivering more organic viewing, and therefore, when you put paid behind that, you'll be delivered the particular video or piece of content that you're trying to get in front of people, and then they'll go on and watch something else that's on that platform. And it's about content for audience sake rather than content for content's sake.
So given all this, like these billions of views that you're seeing, is there anything that you're seeing at the moment or anything that's happened recently, or any changes in those algorithms? Don't have to give me any trade secrets, but anything that you've seen, that you're thinking, wow, well that's a big shift in terms of how they're looking at content now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the consistently across all of the platforms, watch time is increasing, and therefore the delivery of longer form content in search and in suggested video is consistent.
Is that then sort of related to why we're seeing? There's this sort of demise of the sort of quick mashup type content. People like BuzzFeed and these sorts of channels that have now you're just seeing those less and less.
Yeah. So those. There was a lot of people suffered at the hands of Facebook's algorithm change recently with a focus on premium content away from UGC content and repurposing existing UGC. Lots of businesses have suffered at the hands of those changes on Facebook to going from millions of daily views to zero almost overnight. It's quite terrifying. And that's consistent on all of the different platforms. YouTube are shifting very much towards premium content. Their move to away from kind of traditional YouTubers, they're referred to as endemic talent, I think, and now moving to more traditional talent. They've brought in, or they're engaging with the likes of Anthony Joshua and Alexa Chung and Victoria Beckham. They're bringing kind of more traditional talent into those environments. All of the things that we're working with, we've just seen massive growth in, particularly on our official channel side of things. We claim a lot of user-generated content, illegal uploads of TV shows and what have you. The viewing and revenue is declining against all of that, whilst the official channels are all rising. Everything points to the same thing, which is more premium, more longer form, and just more and more of it. I mean, there's hundreds of hours of content uploaded every minute on YouTube alone. Facebook is the same. So the movement to that premium content is definitely, out of everything, is the key.
And so I know, and you guys, I've noticed, obviously have some owned properties as well, don't you? So is that? So I looked at that and I was trying to think, is that something that actually a brand could take a similar approach and say, not necessarily they would do it, but they could say, do you know what, let's actually go out and create some sort of more owned media that we can then try and build an audience from. Is that?
I think that's all of it points to the same thing. It's kind of content creation. Our owned channel proposition is a whole different beast altogether. We've been kind of acquiring lots of content from distribution partners over the last 3 years or so. We saw a massive uptake in viewing, uplift in viewing of factual content in this case. So on our user-generated viewing, so we said, well, let's build some official channels around that. So we built our channel Real Stories, which is a documentaries channel. It does broadly about 1 million views a day of long-form archive documentary content.
And have you grown that mostly organically?
That's all organic growth over the last 3 years. And we have 20 separate different genre channels in those environments. Again, that comes from existing TV content from all over. What we've then had the comforts to be able to do is then commission additional content against that. So I think we commissioned something in the region of 30 different mid-form documentaries which serve multiple different purposes. Some are effectively pilots for taking out to commission for broadcasters. Some were purely about, let's try and win some awards and get some visibility and recognition. Others were just pure monetization. And inside all of that, actually, one of the things we were looking at is how, because we're effectively become a broadcaster in that environment. We are, we're publishing 4 long-form videos a week in each of the channels. There's nearly 1,000 hours of content on that platform now, and a massive audience, 2.5 million subscribers on that channel alone. So how do you then engage with a brand to commission content alongside us, or to be a sponsor partner in those kind of environments as well? I think to do it alone is very hard for a brand like that.
I think almost impossible, probably.
At that scale. At that scale. But, there are, I think for a brand, thinking about kind of owning your audience and building an audience there, it's, the old kind of hub, hero, hygiene type method. You need an always-on strategy, and how do you deliver that alongside your big campaigns, and what are your formats that do that, and who's creating it, and what's the story you're telling, and who is the audience?
And then, thinking that through, then how does the brand then think about, say, retaining an audience? So let's say you maybe, let's say you go down this road. So I'm thinking of a couple of brands that we work with, where actually the field that they're in actually has some really interesting stories around it. You can see they could build out some fascinating stuff there. But it's then, but then you've got the sort of hero pieces. Is then how do they then think about, where's the retention, or what do we do in between, essentially?
The in between is the hardest part,
right?
Because that's the area that traditionally most of the brands have fallen down, because YouTube's always too hard, because you can never build a consistent pattern in there if you're dropping in these big hero moments. But you do need that kind of underlying story. So as a kind of broad reference, one of the broadcasters we were working with, when we first approached them, said, we have this big campaign that we want to launch, our big new series. Can you help us with that? And we said, yes, that's great. But before you do that, can you give us all of your shark videos, and we'll build you an audience first, so that when your campaign comes in, we can lay that on top. And I think that's a really key, if you can get that message right in a brand environment, I think that's really interesting, because that requires a content proposition and a strategy around who is the audience, who are you talking to, what are you trying to tell them, and what are they going to listen to? And I think that's hard. Content for content's sake is a disaster every single time. But content for an audience that are engaged and interested is a really interesting proposition, because you can then build your organic audience alongside your big campaigns. And when you drop in your big campaigns, they serve to continue to build that audience, and you have your kind of, you don't have your spiky viewing, you have your spiky, and then more organic, and then more spikes, and then more organic. So it's all about long-term thinking, with those big campaign hero moments sitting alongside all of that. But it requires a much kind of clearer content strategy
what's your take then on, so we've been looking at the channels and sort of the way they've restructured themselves, almost just from in terms of the way they look. You've got the stories across the top, so you've got these sort of like five bites of the cherry, if you like. Then you've got your mainstream, and then that'll often push off to IGTV or whatever it happens to be. So it's, and we've been looking at it thinking, it's almost now gone this road where it's hero, hope, hygiene, but in the inverse. So you've got, first you've got all these stories which are sort of disposable, casual type content. Then you may capture them in the main feed with a photograph or a 15-second clip. And what you're hoping to do is then push them off ultimately to the longer form piece. Whereas you could look at hero, hope, hygiene, it's almost like the other way around. You've got these big spikes, and then capture them with that and push them hopefully into these next pieces.
So I think the hero, hub, hygiene actually is the other way around. I think that's and as far as at the risk of overusing the phrase, the algorithms are requiring, because in order to build that organic, it requires that layer that sits alongside it. I think stories and the community tabs, and whether that's on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook, I mean, they all are a form. I heard a brilliant description of Facebook having an amazing R&D service. It's called Snapchat.
It's called Snapchat.
And it's just they're all just looking to each other in terms of what are they doing next, what's this one looking like, and they're all trying to find roots in, and stories is one of those. Community, the community tab on YouTube is an amazing environment for us, where you have this kind of video content that is being served.
Yeah.
You are building an engaged audience, both in the content but also in the community, and the conversations that are happening there are really fascinating. And we talk to our teams that are running this. It's 200 people in our business now. Is if you're running a channel or a page or an account, run it like a fan, because the fans will engage with you and engage with the brand much more. And I think that's really important, to be a part of the conversation, rather than trying to force a conversation. And that's stories provides that. The communities provide that. It's just kind of it's how people are consuming more generally.
What's your take on then how that translates to, say, a more B2B environment? I mean, and that's probably not something that you're working very much, but have you got any thoughts on how a B2B company might think about that?
No. No.
Fair enough.
I think it's very hard. I think it depends on who your bees are. I think, I listened to a whole world of podcasts, and I was just listening to Digiday and the guy, the CEO of Bloomberg Media, talking about who their audience is, and their audience is still business people who are paying on corporate credit cards.
Right.
There is still an audience. There's still a conversation to be had.
Yeah.
That's again the individuals and.
I mean, the main argument I tend to use with folks is, look, they're still human beings at the end of the day. So you're trying to capture them. You're trying to capture some attention. You've got this sort of finite amount of attention. You're trying to carve out some piece of it. So you've just got to find a way to capture their attention. The only real difference between them and, say, a B2C is that they're not spending their money. They're spending somebody else's money.
Absolutely.
But they're still human beings.
Yeah, I think that the proposition is still solid enough. Yeah. If you've got, as we just talked about, you and I are listening to a multitude of different business podcasts, and we're still the audience. We're still consuming it, and for whatever purpose, it still has a purpose. So, it might not be The Office US or Gordon Ramsay or the England Football Association, but it still has a purpose. It still has an audience. Still has a value for people.
What about? Is there anything emerging? Are there any sort of? I mean, TikTok's the one that obviously everybody's on this list. But I look at that and I think, how the hell do you monetize that? But it's. Is there anything else out there that you're seeing or think, or is on your radar, and you think we need to keep an eye on that?
I mean, for marketeers, I think those are the kind of core platforms. TikTok is, everybody's trying to figure out, trying to understand. Instagram, everybody's been all over for a long time. Snapchat is a weird environment for a mature publisher.
Or 15, 16.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even less, I would say. Content platforms shifting, Quibi is about to launch soon.
April, is it?
I think so. They're on the content commissioning hunt at the moment. Obviously, all the streamers are all at it. Warner's with HBO Max and NBC with Peacock. Apple have got their platform. Disney Plus. Everybody's in the content game. Everybody's trying to figure out kind of their place in the world. For marketeers, I mean, it's just there are audiences in just so many different places. And I think the interesting thing for me is, and we see it across all the stuff that we do, the audience is different in each of the environments. And so actually working across all of those different environments becomes more and more important, because my 13-year-old is not looking at video content on Facebook, but she spends inordinate amounts of time on Snapchat. My 10-year-old is absolutely addicted to TikTok. It just depends who you're talking to. YouTube continues to be consistent. And Facebook is an older audience, so you've just got this kind of amazing mix of platforms to work from. I haven't seen anything emerging yet that has real scale. I mean, in a different environment, you've then got Twitch for gaming and Microsoft's new platform, which name escapes me, but they've paid a lot of money for Ninja to move from Twitch to. It's just whole different hosts of activities, and those are massive. And again, a whole nother community there. So the evolution is. Half the problem we have is moving fast enough,
right?
And I can't get people in our building fast enough to keep up with it.
Yeah. But at least there's some comfort that probably everyone else is having the same issue.
Absolutely.
It's like once you get to a certain size, trying to shift them onto
it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And then everybody has their own services as well. They've got trying to drive people to owned and operated is another whole beast in itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's enough for us to think about at the moment without.
Great. Well, I mean that's super interesting. I mean, for me, it was I wanted to dive into some of this stuff. I mean, we hear obviously we work much more on the in the marketing side, but hearing how it's your input on that from the publisher side, especially on the broadcast side, you see some of this stuff a bit earlier. So I appreciate you coming down.
That's a pleasure. And the marketing world is as long as you can move along with those platforms, that's the real key. Marketeers have done lots of things in a very traditional marketing way that they used to with TV or on the sides of buses. Actually, this evolution has to bring brands along with it, and the ones that don't, they will get left behind.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very interesting space.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So that's a wrap on this episode of Imminent Marketing. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please don't forget to subscribe or share the podcast. And we look forward to seeing you again next time on Imminent Marketing.